Yep. It helps if we feed them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, she walks all over me too. I work hard so I could give her a good life.
That's very true.
Yep.
All right, I think, Susannah, let's give it 1 more minute and then we can kick it off.
Sounds good.
We have lots to talk about.
Oh, yes.
Okay, it's 4 minutes past. Let's do this. This meeting is recorded. If you object to being recorded, please disconnect from the meeting now. Welcome, everyone, to the Ladies Be Architects study group on how Heroku works. I'm Charly Prinsloo, and my co-presenter is Susannah St. Germain. She's actually the Heroku expert. I'm just here to do the fluffy stuff. And we're very glad that you've joined us today in learning more about Heroku. We want to first and foremost say thank you to our sponsors. For Ladies Be Architects, our platinum sponsors, Odysseus, and bronze sponsors, Capstorm, Southern Cloud. We're very proud that they have sponsored us, and they make it possible for us to bring this study content to you every month. Over to you.
Yes, excellent. So thank you, Charly, and nice to meet you all. If I have not met you yet, my name is Susannah St. Germain, and I am a technical architect at Odysseus.
And you are how many times sold?
Oh, that's on the slide that's coming up. But yeah, I have a lot of certifications. I have a dog. There's some other things you'll see in a couple slides about me. I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. And I'm Charly Prinsloo. I'm actually in the USA, not in the UK, according to the flag. I work for a company called SenseCorp, where I'm the Salesforce practice leader, and I'm also working in my day job as a senior technical architect. So today on the agenda, we're going to spend some time just welcoming you and doing some housekeeping things, and then we're going to celebrate our champions. These are all our Ladies Be Architect members who achieved certifications on their journey to CTA during the last month or since our last study group. And we want to just celebrate them and highlight them. And we want to encourage all of you as you do and complete certifications to share that with us so that we can celebrate you. Then I'm going to kick you guys off on how Heroku works, and Susannah is going to finish us up with the actual nitty-gritties of there's dinosaurs and all kinds of funny pictures in her slides. So she's going to take us through all of that, and then we'll leave some time for questions. You're welcome to post questions in the chat. Vicky will help us moderate those questions, but when we get to the end, you're welcome to ask them as well. Is Gemma on the call today?
I haven't seen her. I don't think she is.
Yeah, I think she's still working. Well, Gemma is the fearless leader and founder of the Ladies Be Architects. She's from the UK. She is an amazing human being. She found the Ladies Be Architects 2 years ago already, I think. She has got 16 certifications. She's an MVP for the 2nd year, Golden Hoodie winner. Incredible human being. And she started Ladies Be Architects, and Susannah and I joined forces with her on our journey to CTA, and we do our bit here in the USA. I'm 16 times certified, also an MVP. I coach for the Rad Women group and work as an architect.
Yes. And I'm also a Salesforce MVP, Rad Women coach, a Golden Hoodie winner, and this slide is actually slightly outdated. I have 20 certifications now.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. All right. And we have these 3 incredible ladies that supports us from down under. We've got Emily, Vicky, and Adrienne. Vicky, I don't see the other 2 on here. Do you want to do intros for the 3 of you?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Vicky. I live in Brisbane, Australia, and I've been with the Ladies Be Architects for about a year now. I think it's gone very quickly. I'm a technology manager for an insurance company in Brisbane, Salesforce MVP and 8x certified. Emily, she's on maternity leave at the moment with an absolutely gorgeous baby girl, but she is a Salesforce architect, 13 by certified, and works for Deloitte here in Brisbane as well. And Adrian is also in Brisbane, so we're all here. She's a Salesforce consultant for one of our local partners. She's also Salesforce MVP. She runs the Brisbane Women in Tech community group, and she's 11 by certified.
Impressive bunch of ladies together. And remember, this is not just for ladies, it is for everybody in the community, and our main purpose is for us to be able to study together. I haven't done the Heroku Architect exam yet. I have once and I was not successful. So today, even though I'm going to be presenting, I'm going to be learning, and I want you guys to learn with us. This is not us being experts telling you how it is. This is us studying together. All right, the champions list. So these are all the ladies who achieved certifications in February and March, all the architect certifications. So first up, we have Platform App Builder. We have Rika Barlach, and I'm really sorry if I say names wrong. I do apologize, but congratulations on your Platform App Builder.
Congratulations.
We have our very own Vicky, who conquered the PD1. Congratulations, Vicky.
Congratulations. That's a tough one.
Yes, that one is a tough one. And then we've got Zoe Lai and Emily Gordon, who achieved Data Architecture and Management Designer. That's one of the designer ones. I'm the Application Architect. Ensuring and Visibility Designer, Anushka Bryce and Donnell Lockwood. Congratulations. This one's a gnarly one.
Oh, yeah.
And Vicky achieved her Application Architect. Congratulations, Vicky. That is incredible. Very well deserved. And that was it. So we didn't get a lot of updates in the last 2 months. So please send us. We want to give you some swag. We send you some swag if you tell us about your certifications. So you can tweet it by just mentioning the Arc Ladies or Ladies Be Architect. You can post it in our Trailblazer community. You can WhatsApp it to us. You can email it to us. Just make sure we know about it so that we can add you to our celebration list.
Excellent.
All right, let's get started. Let's start learning, and we're good on time. So the Heroku Architecture Designer has been added to the CTA journey, to the pyramid. It's still very, very relatively new. I think it's less than a year old, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a lot of information about this exam out there. I know there's a couple of people like Susannah who's written a blog. So I think this is very valuable. And thank you, Susannah, and everybody else for studying with us on this. Heroku is definitely going to be a big part of our future as CTAs or architects. So it's important to get this under the belt.
Absolutely.
Right. Do you want to take us through this from the exam?
Sure. Yes. Happy to do that. So this slide is taken, apologies for the fine print, but you can find this in the exam guide that's linked below. And at a high level, 10%, there's a lot of the exam that's around sort of just core Heroku platform. So understanding the building blocks that are sort of behind the scenes. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So making sure that you can demonstrate how to deploy apps and we're going to talk a lot about things like Buildpacks and Slugs today. So some of this may be foreign language we're definitely going to spend a lot of time focusing on. So after Heroku platform, which is 10%, 17% is around data. And unlike Salesforce, where the database is sort of built in, there are lots of different choices that you can make with Heroku around how you store your data and how you share data within your application and so also outside of it. So that's a huge portion. We are actually thinking about, and I think we're pretty sold on the idea of doing a bit of a series on Heroku content. If folks are interested in that, please let us know maybe in the chat if there's any areas you'd like to hear more about. But there's just so much content on this exam. 1 or 2 sessions probably don't do it justice. I think data alone could absolutely be a session. Security as well. There's very unique Heroku-based sharing, things like private space peering and VPN connections. There's a whole other, even if you're familiar with Heroku, there's a whole set of what's called private spaces that are only accessible to Heroku Enterprise customers. So it's pretty hard to get your hands on to actually play with. So that's probably a good topic. Thanks, Rob, for chiming in. And speaking of Heroku Enterprise, there's actually 28% of the content is around Heroku Enterprise. So that I think definitely deserves some time. We're gonna hit on some of the high-level concepts of Heroku Enterprise, but this is like Charlie was talking about how there's not a lot of content out there. This is one of the areas where there's the least content, just because it's hard to get your hands on it and play with it. And then the last two pieces are architecting applications. So as an architect, not as a developer on Heroku, but as an architect, what are some of the things that you need to be concerned about? What are some of the recommendations that you need to make that align with what's called the 12-factor app methodology? And Charlie's gonna tell us about that in just a second. And then 15% is on integrations because there's lots of great built-in sort of Heroku to Salesforce integrations, and you'll learn why in a second. But there's also other types of integrations, and that's a fair amount of the content as well. So back to you, Charlie.
Thank you. And yes, I just want to emphasize what Susannah said. We want to do a Heroku series. So today's study session is just going to be a small portion of what's covered in the exam. So please don't say, oh, we didn't cover everything. We can't in one session, so we will be launching more Heroku. Rob Cowell just said thank you so much, said he'd share some of his Heroku slides and talk transcript on Heroku. Rob will reach out to you, because if we do more study groups, you're very welcome to come and help us and make sure we get the right content out there to the rest of the community. Thank you very much for stepping up. Okay, so what is Heroku? We all know what is SaaS, right? Salesforce is the typical SaaS, a software that you don't buy in a box at Best Buy or at the software store anymore. Remember those boxes? And you had it's like empty inside, just one book and a CD. In the old days, it used to be like a floppy disk. Now, there'd be 20 disks in there. Now we buy our software online, right? We don't have to install it anymore. We don't have to maintain it. That software as a service. Salesforce is a very good example of software as a service. Infrastructure as a service is where we have services that provide us the pipes and the architecture for hosting applications. Amazon Web Service is probably one of the most well-known infrastructure as a service providers. And then platform as a service is the hot and happening place right now. Both Salesforce and Heroku plays in the platform as a service space. They're both in the top right quadrant for the Gartner PaaS solutions, top solutions in the PaaS space. But it's basically the layer of your architecture where you can host other applications. So it's a platform that sits on top of an infrastructure where you can host application and connect to other applications like Salesforce, which is an application.
And when I was first learning about Heroku, like a long time ago, I found this quote, and for me, this was helpful to sort of connect the dots when I didn't understand a lot of maybe like the underlying concepts, but this is a Heroku sort of marketing tagline, I think, but it does a good job of getting to the point of what Heroku does. Their tagline is the fastest way to go from idea to URL. If you think about that, that's a really good overview of sort of where Heroku shines. So you don't need to worry about necessarily think about things like servers and what sort of operating system do you want to use. You just need to worry about your sort of similar to Salesforce, your app logic and your data. And those are the two things that you need to worry about. And then Heroku will help you get that idea or that app that you're building onto the internet. So I find that helpful.
Yeah, that is absolutely. All right, so we've got an idea of what Heroku is. It's a platform. It's a platform that you access. So high-level features for Heroku is it is built on the gold standard of cloud computing or infrastructure as a service. It's extremely tightly coupled with Salesforce. I mean, Salesforce bought it, and it's now part of the Salesforce ecosystem and product. Pre-built connectors that connect your Salesforce with your Heroku application so you can share data and functionality. It's really nice looking. A lot of the platforms are difficult to use because it's complicated. I struggle with AWS interfaces. Sometimes it's very confusing and there's just too much going on, where Heroku is easy to use. It feels like, it doesn't look like Salesforce, but it feels like Salesforce. It's intuitive. It kind of tells me where I need to click, which is a lot easier to use. It's got security built in. It's got the dev life cycle built in. Heroku's got a very robust CI/CD tooling engine inside it that you can use to build your applications, test it, and deploy it in between your different spaces. It is good for enterprises. We've got some of the biggest companies in the world running applications on Heroku, and it's great for people like us who messes about and build little apps that warn them if their kids open the fridge door too long, or kind of just hobbyist who wants to build applications. The greatest thing about Heroku is that you can code on pretty much any kind of language you want to. You can build your application in the language that suits your need. You can build it in Node.js or Ruby on Rails or whatever you have skills in. You can build your application in that language. You can connect it to whichever database you want to, whether you want to use a Heroku Postgres or a RDS Postgres, or whether you want to connect it to a MySQL database that's sitting on your own remote computer in your front room. It gives you a lot of flexibility to work with the languages and data that makes sense to you.
And one thing I'd add is, it does have a great point and click interface, but it supports sort of developer pro tools. So you can use command line with Heroku too. So you can either do the point and click or the command line, and both of them work great.
And now that feels familiar to us now that we're all working on SFDX with the command line and Visual Studio Code. So it's following that same pattern. I love it when things happens the same way everywhere because it's lesson learned, right?
Exactly.
All right. Do you want to talk about this one?
Sure, yes. So one of the things that is absolutely on the exam, but is, I think, helpful in understanding Heroku if you're brand new to it. Sometimes some of the ways it's constructed or the choices that are made are different from Salesforce if you're only used to Salesforce. So one of the ways to sort of understand those choices and why certain architectures exist in Heroku is by understanding what's a methodology called the 12-factor app. And this 12-factor app methodology was written by one of the co-founders of Heroku. So surprise, surprise, Heroku is built with these 12 factors in mind. And I'll just point out a couple of them. And as we talk today about these different, like maybe foreign terms to you about how Heroku works, I'll try and point out when it's a good example of these 12-factor app principles. The long and short behind the 12-factor app is that it's supposed to sort of promote best practices in building apps in the cloud. And it's sort of a best practices to what you should be doing in the opinion of the co-founder of Heroku, who's very, very well regarded, and a lot of these are, I think, pretty industry standard. It is very Heroku specific, but they're good to know. So especially as an architect, you should be aware of the 12-factor app methodology and be able to sort of talk intelligently about it. So just very quickly to point out a couple of these. One of the things, so I'll start at the top with code base. So the 12-factor app principles state that there should be exactly one code base for a deployed service. So you're going to see that when we talk about how you deploy your code onto Heroku. And the idea is that this code base can be used for many deployments so that you can deploy your same app to multiple different servers if you wanted to, and all of the running instances of that app would be referring to the exact same code base. So if you make a change one place, then it's changed everywhere is one of the benefits of that. Dependencies, we'll see a lot of that today as well, where all dependencies in your code, in your application, should be declared and nothing should be assumed. Essentially, that means, if I'm referring to another, maybe a JavaScript library that I'm depending on, that I have explicitly stated it, and it's not sort of an implicit dependency. Config, we'll look a little bit at config, how if you want to change maybe which environment a particular app is pointed to, you should be able to do that with config and like a variable. Think like custom metadata types instead of having to go back and rewrite your code. So a lot of these things have a lot of overlap with Salesforce too when you start to think about it. What else are some good ones? Processes. So where is that? Number 6. Processes are huge with Heroku because a lot of how things are deployed have a lot of importance in how you're going to architect your apps. So one thing we're going to talk about in a little bit is that how we deploy apps in Heroku. When you deploy them, these processes are stateless, meaning that all of the different deployments of your apps don't necessarily know anything about each other's deployments. So how do you handle this sort of ephemeral deployment of data and backing services? And I don't want to get too heavy into all of this because we're going to try and break this down in sort of easy to understand terms, but maybe the only other one I will point out is concurrency. So that's huge with Heroku as well. So in Salesforce, we don't really care where our data is hosted. We maybe see in the URL that you're on like NA 12 or whatever, North America 12 or EU 14. Those are the instances. With Heroku, you need to start making some choices and need to understand what that residency or region really means. So all of that to say that you might need to make architectural choices around having concurrent versions of individual processes, and then also sort of duplicated instances of the same process. So we'll look at both of those. It's a lot. The 12-factor app, it's good to read, good to understand, but it is a little bit academic a bit. So let's take sort of do the opposite now. So you heard a little bit about these really like academic methodologies and principles. Let's go and look at the actual point and click application of Heroku and get a feel for what it looks like.
Yes.
So Charly.
So I'm going to try and stop this. So I want to show you what Heroku looks like. Remember I said it's nice. It's not ugly. I don't like ugly software. So you go to Heroku's main page, find the login link. The URL is id.heroku.com/login. If you don't have an account, you can just sign up for one. It doesn't cost you any money. You can just create an account and you just log in. And this takes me to my dashboard. So dashboard.heroku.com, and it shows me all my apps. Now I have the free version of Heroku. And remember we said hobbyists or enterprises alike can use it. Mine is the free version. It has a limit of only 5 apps. So I have 5 apps on here. They don't do much. I've tested Heroku Connect quite a few. I've broken an RDS database in one of them. I've done some nonsense in them, but they're here. So this is what they look like. If I didn't have 5, I'd be able to say new and create a new app, which is very easy. I'll just show you. Give it a name. You choose a region, so you need to understand the concurrency and the regions in order to know which one I'm going to choose. And I'm going to ignore the pipeline bit, and I can say create. I can give it a name. And it's also going to not let me because I already have 5.
All right.
Oh, and it's got to be unique across the whole Heroku.
And you can only use lowercase letters because Heroku is at its core really developer centric. So there's a lot of little choices that they made.
Okay, I know what that means, but it's available. So I'm going to do crap, and it's going to say it cannot be because I need to pay because I already have 5. But I'm not going to do that right now. So let me go back to my dashboard, and I have my couple of apps here. So these I've created previously, and I want to just show you this one. All I did is fill in that form, gave it a name, and I chose the USA, and I created it. I have a couple of tabs at the top that tells me the overview of my app. So are there any add-ons installed? Do I have any Dynos configured? Do I have any collaborators on my project? And it gives me a little feed, like the Salesforce Chatter feed of what has happened on here. I then have the resources tab, that tells me about all the resources, the Dynos that's been configured and provisioned, and it'll give me more information and the ability to configure them on this page. And then any other add-ons that I've enabled. So I can see in this project, I have got a Heroku Connect add-on installed, and I have a Heroku Postgres database installed. And it's both free, the free versions. So you can quickly build these apps without spending any money.
And I'll just comment on Rob's question. So that is true. What Charlie said, that the name is across all customers, and that's because Heroku apps exist in the global namespace. So you have to, you can't use a common name. And if you leave it blank, the name is optional through the CLI. And if you leave it blank, then they'll come up with like a crazy name, like all of the Salesforce sandboxes have, whatever, like goat something something something. Heroku does the same thing.
Yeah, it gives just your app a really dodgy name like Brave Beaver or Angry Wolf or something. I don't know who comes up with this stuff, but it does. All right, so we've got a couple of more. Deploy is, remember we said Heroku has a very robust CI/CD tooling engine, how you can add this to your deployment pipelines. You can deploy connected to GitHub or Heroku Git or even the container registry. So there's a lot of functionality here, and this will be its own whole session, I promise you. Okay. And then you have metrics that you can install, and once I've got Dynos running and there's actually something happening in this app, I can then see the metrics on how I'm connected, what kind of volumes I'm running through it, what the apps are doing, what speeds they're running, all that kind of stuff will be in my metrics tab. Activity is just my feed again. And then access, I could add collaborators and give them different roles and responsibilities to work on my app. So security settings applies here. And then I have my main app settings in the settings. So usually you kind of work on the overview and the settings tabs. When you do something like Heroku Connect, you don't really fiddle with the middle stuff. It tells you on which stack it's hosted, frameworks, the slug size. This is really just a bare bones Heroku Connect app. So there's not a lot of stuff here. Susannah was talking about the configuration variables earlier. This is where the project configuration variables are stored so that we don't hard code anything into our code and that we can change them on the fly when we need to. We got Buildpacks, security certificates, domains. We get a default domain for our app, but if we want to have a cool domain, Rob was saying in the comments that, do you know that swapmyswag.com is built on Heroku? So that's probably where, this is where you would set up the domain here and link your project to that specific domain. Ownership, maintenance, and of course the delete app, which is not always fun to press. All right, so see, it's pretty easy. It's pretty intuitive. It's not hard to figure out how this works. I've installed 2 add-ons, and you just have the menus on the. That's my app actually. So my app had a UI, and as I open app, I would see it there, but I don't even have a front end for the app because it's just an integration app. It just connects 2 systems to one another. So that's about it, I think. Oh, configure add-ons, that's what I wanted to show. So if I wanted to add more add-ons, add-ons is like apps on the App Exchange. They're very handy. There's usually something for what you're looking for. Some are free, some are paid. And by clicking this, you go to the Heroku App Store and you can download any of the add-ons into your project. Any questions? Oh, you can ask questions. All right, let's move back. Is there anything else we should show here, Susannah?
I think we're good. I would point out, so you can see that there's installed add-ons and that each of the add-ons have additions too. So we're not going to talk about it today, but I think that's a good call out. So every choice you make sort of has an influence on dependencies that you might want to install in your app. So Charlie has a hobby version of Heroku, essentially the free version. So she only has access to the hobby version of Heroku Postgres, which is a database that you can plug into your Heroku app. So we'll call out some of those when we see them along the way.
And each one of these add-ons, once they're installed, if I click on their name, it actually takes me to that add-on configuration page. So Heroku Connect is a connector that connects Heroku to Salesforce. That's what Heroku Connect does. So when I open the Heroku Connect add-on inside my project, this is where I manage my connection. This is which Salesforce org do I want it to connect to, and which mapping. So I want to map my account data in Salesforce to something. So my Postgres database account table, and then case to case, and I can say which fields and which rows should be mapped. So if I click on the add-on, I go to the add-on configuration page, and there's a whole bunch of functionality here depending on what the add-on offers. But this is this is a quick look at the Heroku Connect add-on that I've installed into my app.
That's great.
Okay,
Perfect.
Good. So let me get back to presenting, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, Susannah.
Yes, excellent. So we've talked a little bit about the principles that went behind building Heroku, and we looked at the Heroku interface. But some of you might be wondering, or if you're already starting to study and digging into some of the technical documentation, you might be in the midst of figuring out, okay, but how does all this fit together? Like, I can press a button and deploy an app to Heroku and I see it up on the web, but like what's happening behind the scenes? This is a diagram that Heroku has published, and it does a good job of explaining if you understand all the terminology already. So we're going to be talking about like what this actually means and add a layer below with some more detail. But at a really high level, I'll sort of talk you through this, and it might seem a little bit unclear right now, so stick with me. But at a super high level, when you deploy an app to Heroku, and remember there's two main buckets of functionality of like the core Heroku platform. One of them is deploying apps and the other one is running apps. So those are the two main like core features of Heroku. So to deploy, you're going to use, so Heroku is again tightly coupled with Salesforce, also tightly coupled with Git. So you're going to use Git to push your repository with your code, or a repository of someone else's code to Heroku. And it's going to create a space in Heroku in a remote, it's called a remote repository. You don't necessarily need to know about that yet, but a remote space for that code to be processed by Heroku. Once that happens, Heroku has a bunch of functionality that analyzes the code, and if your code is in one of the common languages that Heroku works with sort of out of the box, it will analyze the code and can sometimes automatically know what's called a build pack, what build pack it needs to use to help process the code into an app, essentially. So once that happens, once the build pack is retrieved, the build pack, which we'll explain what it is in a second, starts to do its work. So it compiles the code and retrieves some assets and creates what's called an app slug. And if you're like me, you're like, what the heck? The first time I was learning about this, I was like, what's a slug? What is this? But your build pack essentially creates an app slug. And then this fourth diagram, which is where for me as a newbie to Heroku, I totally lost what was happening. And the fourth thing, you can see that all of a sudden this app slug that got created is now inside a box called Dyno, and it's pointing to other boxes. So we're going to walk through exactly a layer below in simpler terms too what all of this means. But essentially this 1 through 4 is walking us through deploying your code to Heroku, and then Heroku compiling it and distributing it out to different containers that can then be accessed on the internet. So let's go to the next slide and start to break this down a little bit. The first thing that I think I missed when I first started learning, and it's surprisingly important, is understanding the concept of region/runtime. So you'll see it referred to as sort of the Heroku runtime, or your Dynos runtime, or your apps runtime. But essentially, when you create a new app in Heroku, like Charlie showed, and like you can see on the right hand of the slide, the first thing you do after you give it a name and an owner, you choose the region of where your app will be hosted. So unlike Salesforce, where you create a new instance or a new playground, and you get this crazy instance name or crazy like domain, you get to put in you have some choices around where your particular app is hosted. And these two regions, depending on what edition of Heroku you have, if you have the free version, that exists in what's called the common runtime. And the common runtime is very similar to Salesforce because it's multi-tenant. So we've all learned about Salesforce multi-tenancy and how you're in this apartment with other people and you all share the resources, but you have your own little spot, your own little apartment. Heroku in the common runtime is similar. So there's a single multi-tenant network per region. So United States and Europe, those are the two regions available in the common runtime. And that obviously has implications for your app. If your app is really complex or very heavy or needs to have really low latency, maybe you don't want to share all those resources with everyone else, because sometimes you'll have to, when you share resources, sometimes things are maybe not as I don't know, specific and as customized as you need. So on the other hand, in Heroku Enterprise Edition, there's a concept that is a whole section of the exam, surprisingly, on private spaces. So the private spaces runtime is not multi-tenant. There is no common runtime in APAC. No, it's either US or Europe at the moment. Private spaces runtime is, and just as a complete aside, I think that's a good question for those of you who might be wondering, well, like, why do I care of EU versus US, or what if I'm in, South America? The real implication of the regions I could go on for a lot about it, but there's two main implications. Data residency, which is, are you working in an industry where it is legally required that your data remains within certain borders? If it is, that's obviously a concern. And then also the concept of latency. So if you if your app is slow, right, and you need to have lots of volumes going really fast between your app consumers and the backend of your app, sometimes where your app is hosted can have an effect on that. So you would want to host it as close as possible to you. Yes, if you have most users in US, you should definitely choose US, because for most apps it doesn't have a huge impact, but it's always best to choose the region nearest to you. Sorry for I could talk about this part for a while. High level look though, with private spaces, so it's single tenant. That's the biggest piece. So it's not multi-tenant Salesforce, it's single tenant. Each customer has their own private space, and in each private space, it's an isolated network. The routing within the space is protected, and there's even a really fancy version of private spaces that is called Shield private spaces. That's for really highly regulated, like healthcare environments. Okay, so I think that's important to know, like, at the outset. So let's dig a little bit further. Next slide, Charlie, if you don't mind. Okay, now that we know about runtime, let's go back to those words that were maybe foreign to some of us, things like Dynos and Slugs and Buildpacks, and just very quickly break them down. So Dynos. So Dynos they're not dinosaurs, but they are isolated virtualized containers. So think about the fact that most of Heroku is multi-tenant, right? You're sharing the same server, but you need to have your apps hosted in a container that is not necessarily impacted or seen by other containers inside that same multi-tenant environment. So the Dyno is a little container that holds your app, and all apps and their dependencies and things that hang off them are all in this container called a Dyno. So once we have our containers, we need to talk about how do those containers actually get filled. And that's where the concept of a slug comes in. So a slug is essentially a compressed version or a compressed copy of your application that is optimized to be passed into that container and then distributed out. So Slugs contain your code and the dependencies and all those complex things sort of compressed and prepackaged, ready to hand to the Dyno. And then the third thing, new terminology, is Buildpacks. And if you can see, we're kind of going top to bottom. So how do Slugs get made? Well, Buildpacks are this Heroku sort of proprietary term that drives the compilation of your code into that compressed version. So the build pack will take your app and it will look at it and it'll say, oh, you're writing an app in Ruby. Okay, we have the scripts and some extra dependencies that we know you're going to need because you're writing an app in Ruby. So the build pack will then take the app, all the dependencies, and the language runtime, and essentially create a slug. So we go from Buildpacks to Slugs to Dynos. So we'll revisit this, but those are the terms. And those are key, like 3 main key terms. If you're trying to learn about Heroku, like, and it's totally foreign, like create a little cheat sheet for yourself and like remember sort of how those things interrelate, because it's really, really fundamental to learning about it. Okay, so I mentioned Dynos are the containers, right, where all the apps exist. And since every single app in Heroku exists in a Dyno, and Heroku is all about building apps, you wouldn't be surprised that there are lots of different, both architectural and I guess design time choices that you can make regarding Dynos. So there's a handful of settings, or you can get them confused, but essentially Dyno types and Dyno configurations are the 2 different levers you have when you're working with those containers. So every container is tagged with one of 3 configurations, and that configuration is going to tell Heroku, like the Heroku platform that oversees and orchestrates all of this, what that container is allowed to do and what it can essentially listen for. So there's web dynos, and those web dynos are the ones that are going to receive web traffic. So if you need to host your app on the internet, you need to make sure that you have your web dynos to receive that HTTP web traffic. And then, of course, that's not the only thing we need to be concerned about. We can't only be concerned about people seeing our app. We obviously have a lot of processing and things that need to happen in the background to actually make our app useful. Things like queuing of if it's someone clicks on a button and a process needs to happen. Usually you need some background jobs or queuing systems in order to handle all of that work. And that exists in what's called a worker dyno. And then finally, there's a third kind of dyno called one-off dynos. Don't need to worry a ton about that, but I'll point out that these are very common. You'll worry about it when you're studying, deeper in your content. But this is a great example of the 12-factor app. One-off dynos are created so that administrative tasks, such as database migrations and maybe having a console session open, all of that can be handled as a part of your app. It doesn't need to be like outside the system on someone's manual to-do list. All of this can be packaged in a Heroku app. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about dyno configuration. So that's one attribute that each dyno has to have. And then there's one other lever, like we said, that you can pull or push with your dynos, the containers that your app exists in. And this has to do with the idea of scaling. So if you are using, if you remember, Salesforce is at the top of the pyramid, Amazon Web Services is at the bottom. One of the reasons to use Heroku is that it's easier to handle changes that might happen with things like traffic. So if all of a sudden, say you're Salesforce and you are running a Dreamforce event and you're encouraging all like whatever it is, 200,000, something crazy, 20,000 people to create a new sandbox org all of a sudden, or Trailhead Playground, you're going to see so much more traffic in that 4 days than you would the rest of the year. With more traditional technologies, that is a really onerous task to scale up and scale down. You have to like physically buy servers and like worry about logistics and all of that. But with Heroku, the idea of scaling or being able to handle more traffic or larger or more complex, more intensive computing processes is relatively easy. It's like a drop down in Heroku where you say, I want, and it's probably a good time to just at a high level talk about the idea of we're talking about scaling, but there's two ways to scale. So you can scale vertically, and that's on the left-hand side, where you can see you go from different dyno types, so free all the way up to performance L. So vertical scaling has to do with when you need more memory or when you need more CPU resources. So that's a choice, again, choice you make as an architect, as a developer. Heroku does have some auto scaling, but sometimes you need to tell Heroku exactly what you need. The other scale, so you'll see across the horizontal axis, there's a concept of horizontal scaling as well. So that is a good example of that. Is if the traffic example, sort of the classic web traffic example. If you are all of a sudden needing more, your website is crashing because there's too many people hitting it, you would want to scale up your web dynos so that you can handle all of those concurrent HTTP requests. So all of this to say that there's these two big levers. So even if you're like, well, I don't understand the RAM or the CPU share or whatever, that's okay. You will need to learn about it for the exam. There are questions specifically around, in this scenario, should I horizontally scale my my dynos, or should I go from a standard 1x to a performance L? There's questions like that. But at a super high level for this first dive into behind the scenes of Heroku, just know that there's different types. Each dyno has to have a type and a configuration, and the type has direct impact on what your app can do. And I saw a good comment from Rob, and I'll just point that out. So yes, size or duration of work versus volume of work. Yes, no, that's a great concise way to say it. Okay, so let's talk about Dyno Manager. This is sort of Heroku behind the scenes. The Dyno Manager is not this guy cartoon on the right, but it is the Heroku runtime mechanism that keeps dynos running automatically. So it's another great feature of Heroku. Most of the time, unless you're using a free or hobby dyno type, which go to sleep after like 30 minutes or something if you don't, if there isn't any traffic, most of the time the Dyno Manager will keep everything automatically running. There is, so back to our runtime conversation, the common runtime has a single Dyno Manager per region. So that's responsible for handling all of the dynos in that multi-tenant environment, whereas Private Spaces has a dedicated Dyno Manager per private space. So as you can imagine, that has implications, right, for performance potentially. Next slide, please. Okay, so those were the super high level concepts. We're gonna put it together now and look at how exactly when you are deploying and running your apps on Heroku, what happens. Let's go a level below that Heroku diagram. So the first thing that you do when you deploy an app to Heroku is you're pushing your code, right? You're pushing your code into Heroku. The code is then received by one of the Slug compilers. So that's the part of Heroku that looks at the code and analyzes it and determines if there is an appropriate build pack to then compress your code and turn it into a Slug. One note on that is that you can explicitly state your build pack in, I think it's in the config bars where you define that. But most of the time, if you're using one of these 8 languages, Heroku can detect it. Once it's created this Slug, so again, Slug is the compressed version of your code that's ready to be promoted and hosted on Heroku in a dyno, in a container. So you have your Slug. You then run another command or click a button, depending on if you're a UI person or a command line person. You would then run this Heroku PS scale and define what type of dynos. So what type of containers are you having lots of processes, or are you having lots of web traffic? What do you need? What sort of mix of resources do you need? So we've scaled our app, and what that does is downloads and expands that Slug. So it turns the Slug into a dyno. It expands that Slug into a dyno that's ready for execution. Next slide. And then part 2, just to wrap it all up. So we did the deploy, and now we're into sort of the concept of the runtime, the Heroku running your app on the internet. So this new dyno has been started up because you passed it that Slug that was ready for execution. The dyno is then registered with the router. This happens at the Heroku router level, where this sort of the guts of Heroku that acts as like the traffic controller sees the traffic coming in and essentially distributes it out to the proper dynos. So if you're getting web traffic, it pushes it to the web dynos. If you're getting like a queue or some sort of process that needs to handle maybe like downloading photos or doing some sort of high intensive computation work, it would then route them to the worker dynos. And it would also help distribute, so sort of like load balancing, distribute out all of the work or all of the things that are happening amongst the different dynos in what's called the dyno formation, or essentially how many web dynos and how many worker dynos. And again, dynos are just containers that hold versions of your app in it. But that's super high level how Heroku works all together. I think we have some wrapping it up, and we're coming up at time. There's a lot of information to put into one session, but I didn't want to leave without talking about something really important that Charlie hit on already, which is the concept of add-ons. This is especially important for Heroku. If you're coming from Salesforce, you might have assumed that there is a database with your app that you're building on a Heroku, but that is not the case. With Heroku, you actually need to add different types of backing services if you want them. So things like databases or like an email service or other types of caching or storage, all of those things you need to make a choice, make an architectural decision about what you want to use and how you can include it in your app. It's relatively easy to do with Heroku. It's much easier than trying to set up your own database, but you still need to spin them up via the command line or with the point and click interface. Luckily, you can do it very quickly. These are the three main managed data stores, I think Heroku calls them, that are available. And we could do a whole session on the data stores that are available and why choose one or the other. But just know that the main three databases are Postgres, Redis, and Kafka, and they have different features that are good for different use cases. And then one other point on this, just before we move to the next slide, even if you don't think, I don't know what app you would not need necessarily any database with, but back to the 12-factor app, if you'll remember, one of the factors is that everything should be isolated, like all the, and that's true about dynos. So dynos don't know anything, they're stateless, they don't know anything about themselves or about the other dynos. So in order to have dyno to dyno communication, it's like these funny cartoon images in my head. In order to have dyno to dyno communication, one way to get around the stateless feature is to actually communicate via the database. So have whatever information you want to pass to your other version of your app to exist in a database. Like an example of web traffic coming in, someone filling in a form, and you need the guts of that form to go to a queue for something else to happen, you would first write whatever was put into the form to the database. Just a very simple example. So I think that's probably the last slide before we do the wrap up. Yeah, so this is more of a cheat sheet. You'll get these slides. These are all the things we talked about with the Heroku official definitions. So we learned a lot about Buildpacks and Slugs. We talked about config vars and add-ons. Procfile we didn't speak about, but it's one of the things that you prepare in deploying your app to Heroku, and it essentially declares the different type of commands that your users can execute in the app. And then there's another sheet on the next slide. I'm not going to walk through these, but that talks about the other side of, remember, the two main pillars of Heroku, which are deploy and run. These are the run concepts that we talked through, so dynos, dyno formation, and all that stuff. And two things that could be their own talk, which are the idea of logging, and we talked about scaling. So just logging is one that we didn't hit on. Okay.
I think, Susannah, we need a whole nother hour just to go through your cheat sheet.
Yeah.
There's a lot of words on there that I'm going to go, oh, I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, so if you're studying the cheat sheet, and that's like totally lifted from Heroku documentation, those final two slides. So definitely reference that. They're good definitions and good like flashcard terms for your study, for sure.
Excellent. We have 3 minutes for questions. Anybody? Okay, while you think of your question, next steps, there's a wonderful trail on Trailhead for the Heroku Architecture Designer. Go do that one. It's a good place to start. Remember to find us in the Trailblazer community. Remember to reach out to us on your certifications or any of your news. Keep us up to date on your journey. We are absolutely here to do this together. We have a question. When is part 2? First of all, well, hopefully we can do it quicker. Susannah and I can sit down and figure out calendars and just see how quick we can do this series, because I want to do my exam soon. So it might be good if we put some stuff to it. All right, so we'll update our website and Twitter and the Trailblazer community with the next installment, so keep an eye out for that. And then another question, Susannah, what are some of the most common examples of how Heroku is being used with Salesforce?
Is that a question on how Salesforce uses Heroku, or how you can use both systems together? I guess we can answer both of them. I'll answer the latter. If you were part of Trailhead DX, there was a Secure the Force challenge that was like a fun way to potentially earn swag and things like that. It's a little app that got hosted with challenges. That was run completely on Heroku, if you checked that out. That's the latest thing I've seen Salesforce use Heroku to host. And the other half, Charlie, do you want to?
I have a good example. You know, when you need test data. You need test data for regression testing and for data migration testing. You need masses. Say you need to import 2,000 contacts, and you need to do it every time you've refreshed your sandbox or every time you're installed a new app. You can host your data on a Postgres database or RDS, and because you don't want that to be in your Salesforce all the time, and you can use Heroku Connect to just push that data every time. So you don't have to use the data loader. You can just set up the Heroku Connect app to put that data into your Salesforce org. So you can create test libraries of data. I've seen that happen before as well. Heroku's CI/CD pipeline, integrate that with your Git, create your environment strategy, and your CI/CD approach using Git and Heroku to automate some of that deployment and release management tasks. That's where Heroku is also very, very helpful on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And a lot of times I've seen folks use Heroku to as sort of the front-end UI for a mobile app. If you need to do a totally custom mobile app that's not Salesforce One and maybe not even like a hybrid or one of the, I don't know, I know there's a Swift Salesforce partnership now or whatever. But a lot of times if you just need a quick sort of stand up an app that's like a web app, obviously, Heroku is an easy way to do it. You can, like Charlie was saying, you can sort of do the reverse of pushing your data, or well, it's part of it, pushing your data from Salesforce to a Postgres database, and then having that Postgres database be the backend for your web app.
Yeah. Well, we're pretty much just over time. There's one more example. Bear with me. Do you guys know the Salesforce Toolkit? It's probably the one URL that's the most bookmarked on my computer and in my history every single day. So Toolkit for Salesforce, it's cloudtoolkit.co. I believe this is a Heroku application, completely built on Heroku. And you can use this to switch. This is very handy. You can disable workflows and flows and triggers with a point and click using this tool. You can run data compare or compare. You can do your schema work. You can create masses of fields with this tool. Package Builder is generate a manifest.xlm file for Visual Studio Code. If you want to work with a project.
That's a good one.
This I use all the time. You can do a code scanner. This is all built on Heroku. And this is probably the most incredible set of Salesforce tools out there, and it's completely free. But remember the donate button. I don't actually know who built this, so I don't know where the money goes.
Rob was saying Ben Edwards.
Ben Edwards. Okay, yes. Well, he should get a medal or something, or 4. This is incredible, and this is built on Heroku.
And this will be on the internet now, so Ben will get a shout out. Awesome.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, that's all from our side. Thank you very much for joining us today. It was incredibly fun. Susannah, thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge. I know I learned a lot today, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.